What do I need to be good at to be great at something?
Hello, everyone. You are listening to She Leads with Carly. And in this show, we talk to the absolute best, brightest, and yes, badass leaders.
Tap into where your natural curiosity takes you. Just making sure you're not your own roadblock. Even if you do fall, you're going to fall and you're going to learn.
Together, let's build a DNA of what it takes to rise to the top and truly make an impact. I'm your host, Carly Malatsky. Hello, everyone. Welcome to She Leads with Carly. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Dushka Zapata. Dushka is a renowned communication expert with over 20 years of experience in the industry. Dushka's work revolves around helping both companies and individuals articulate their identity and develop their personal brand. She has noticed that people often find it challenging to express who they are and what they do, hindering their reputation, their brand, and customer engagement. Dushka helps people and businesses find their unique voice. Her work has been consumed on Q&A site Quora over 261 million times, and she has written over 10 bestsellers, including, most recently, For All I Know, A Shebang of Checklists for Life, and Please Don't Blame Love, a Relationship Handbook, where she dives into creating better relationships and how to respond to the challenges that often come in the way. I'm incredibly excited to talk about that. But Dushka, it's so great to have you on She Leads. Welcome to the show.
It's wonderful to be here, Carly. What got you started on doing these?
Okay, well, I'll go real quick just because I just want to talk to you. But okay, She Leads. I love podcasts. I love listening to podcasts. And this was at the start of COVID around 3 years ago. And I was always so inspired. I came out of podcasts like feeling so energized. And on one hand, I was like, okay, good. I'm excited for, this point in my career to really talk to these people and be on the same level. But then on the other hand, I was like, you know what? Why not reach out to them and bring my, young energy and just learn from them? And so kind of got started like that, didn't think much about it, and just cold emailed hundreds of people and came across incredible people from it. So it's been amazing.
Well, the day you decided to start doing that was my lucky day.
I love that. So Dushka, first, it's such a pleasure. Really, I'm so excited to talk to you. First, set the scene. Where are you in the world? Where are you working? How's your setup going?
I'm in San Francisco. I work from home. I love it so much. I love it more than I ever did. I think what being on lockdown taught me is that I'm a lot more introverted than I thought I was.
Yep, I can understand that. I can relate to that. So I want to go to little Dushka, maybe 5-year-old Dushka, if you will. How was your childhood? At this point in your life, what was exciting to you, and what did you want to be when you grew up?
Yeah, so I recently wrote about that, so I'm going to read it to you.
Please.
The first thing I want to say is that my memories of my childhood are less like a movie and more like snapshots.
Okay.
So this is written like snapshots. I remember a red velvet dress. I remember baking, a kitchen with brick colored tile and a tall spice rack. The smell of nutmeg and cinnamon and freshly baked loaves of bread studded with dried fruit. I remember painting with my hands, fingers splayed on a white surface that surrounded me, large swirls of color of my own creation. I remember playing with clay and how it stuck to my fingers. I remember being tucked in tight, the sheets pulled taut around me. Suspenseful bedtime stories that spanned many nights. Please, 2 more minutes. I remember soap and water and Band-Aids wrapped around anything scraped, cut, or bruised. This will get better soon because I just gave it 1,000 kisses, see? I remember conversations that took place mostly in whispers, like this whole thing we are talking about is assembling itself to create our own private universe, your own system of stars, your family, an ever-expanding galaxy. I remember being taken many places. Look, Dushka, it's all for you. Velvet and clay, sheets and words, ruins and skies, places of sand and constellations. They all exist just for you. The most beautiful thing I remember about my childhood is love.
It seems clear that your imagination had no limit, right? You were this happy and just always thinking and playing with your hands. Was there someone that gave you that freedom? Did you have that freedom that said, just go experience it and think however you want to think?
Yeah, I think both that credit goes to both my parents. I think they were both very creative and very free thinkers. They were people who liked to think for themselves. But I think my mother in particular, she's a sculptor, and I played with clay, and she actually made a table for me so that I could paint with my food. So a lot of me growing up was about being creative. And
Wow.
both my parents were writers. So I remember the sound of the typewriter is the sound of my childhood.
I love that. And at this age, did you also see yourself as a writer? Were you also, as soon as you could write, were you writing a bunch?
Yeah, I actually want to read you something else about that because I'll read you this and then I'll answer your question a little bit more specifically.
Perfect.
When I was a kid, and I don't mean 13, but rather 6, I loved to write. It created an alternate world for me. When I was writing, time did not exist. It was all I wanted to do, which is weird because over the years, I lost it. I lost writing to life, I guess. I went to school, I made friends, I got busy, I got a job. I wrote a little bit in diaries I locked, in notebooks I threw in drawers, and in letters I sent off and never saw again. My writing, dispersed, dissipated, was banished. One day I found myself in a life that I couldn't believe was mine. I was in a relationship that wasn't working, in a job that sucked the soul out of me, and grieving the death of a person so close to me, I think I died on that day too. For reasons that were mostly a coincidence, I picked writing back up. It felt like I was dying of thirst, and somebody handed me a tall, clean glass of water. I could not put it down. I set aside everything to write, everything. I quit my job. I ended my relationship. I moved to a new place, a small apartment that seemed designed for someone who wanted to write. I wrote 14 books, one every 6 months, right after the other. Those books are evidence of me figuring myself out, my sadness, my loss, my patterns, my mistakes, answers to all my life questions. As I wrote those books, time passed in the real world. In that time, my entire life righted itself. Why am I telling you this? Because, and I state this with urgency, with certainty, the key to everything, the answers to all the things we desperately look for and cannot seem to find, are all in the things we for some reason decided we were too old to do.
By the way, you're a beautiful writer. I absolutely love it. Where are these pieces? What book are you reading from, by the way?
Oh, these are just from Quora. Quora is the question and answer site. I've written around 9,000 answers on that site. So pretty much anything anyone ever asks me, I'm like, I can look that up. I already wrote it. I always knew I wanted to write. Always. Ever since I learned to. Except that, as I point out in this essay, I lost track of it. I don't know how we lose track of something that's right in front of us, but we do.
I can go in so many different directions, but I even want to stick on this one point, which something I'm passionate about is one, just the education system, right? Especially when you're young, you almost get put into these buckets. For instance, like you're creative, you're good at math, you love science, right? Like all of these buckets. And yes, there's a whole totem pole, which is already problematic in its own right. But how do you feel about people, who maybe are older now, but when they were younger, they said, no, you're not creative. Like you shouldn't be writing. You shouldn't be expressing yourself in the quote unquote creative ways that we see today. Do you think that's anyone could be creative? Do you think anyone could write? Is it something that's you're born with? How do you view all of that?
Yeah, let me answer the question in 2 parts. The first is I want to tell anyone out there that your words have an incredible impact on the people around you. If someone tells you that you are not supposed to do one thing or another, it is very, very common that those words get under someone's skin. So be very careful what you tell someone. I have seen many, many times teachers tell kids that they can't do this or that. And I'm like, you are carving out their destiny. So that the first thing is let's be careful with what we say to other people. It has a huge impact. The second piece of that is I think everyone is creative. I think that I define creativity very broadly. It's about, you're creative if you're raising a child, if you're making a cake, if you're writing a book, if you're making a sculpture. But I think that our purpose as humans is to make something out of nothing. And I believe that every time I do that, I recover. I heal from whatever it is that I'm hurting from. I have to go back to the person who makes something out of nothing.
I love that. And it's almost how I see it too, is everyone almost has their own outlet for creativity. And, what works for one person in writing may not work for another person, right? And like, I love that aspect where everyone just has their own freedom and outlet and they get such peace from it. But there's no one answer for everyone.
I agree. And maybe there's a possibility that we have to all bring together, like create a larger puzzle, and we all have the thing that we do that contributes to that puzzle, and that we as a community, as a larger community, are creating something more comprehensive. I like to think that what I do is a piece of something a lot bigger.
Yeah. So, Dushka, I want to go into a core part of your work, which is helping people and companies express themselves. So, before we even get into that, why do you think we have a hard time expressing ourselves? Where is there a blocker?
Yeah, I think that goes back to our previous conversation, right? About things we're told when we were little. What did you hear? What do you remember hearing the most when you were like, I'm sad? People are like, Carly, what? Don't be sad.
Yeah.
Right?
Why are you crying? Don't cry.
Don't cry. Come on. It's not that bad. So I think that forever we are dragged away from every feeling that isn't peppy or happy. We're not allowed to feel it. So I think that creates a lot of inadequacy around articulating it. But I also think it creates even shame. Like, we don't know how to explain what we feel because we are taught that a lot of the feelings we feel are wrong or inadequate, or we're not looking at it right. Don't be sad. It's so what? How can you deny my feelings? And right. I think that we are very uncomfortable with the feelings of another person. Like a friend is like, I'm really anxious. And I'm like, well, don't be. Everything's going to be okay because, and then I'm like, what am I doing? This person has a right to feel anxious. So I think that part of the reason why we have trouble expressing ourselves is because we have been taught not to feel. By well-intentioned people, by the way. It doesn't necessarily mean people wanted to like muzzle us.
Yeah.
But I think that there's a lot of repressed emotions because feeling anything other than happy is not okay.
And almost society, so what I hear is society has almost conflated it with weakness often. Like sadness, anxiousness, whatever it may be, it's often like, okay, you're not living up to the task at hand or something.
Yeah. With weakness, as you put it, or maybe with discomfort. Like we are uncomfortable with someone, my dad died 9 years ago. 9 years. You have no idea how many people are like, you should be over it by now. And I'm like, I'm never going to be over it. I'm always going to be sad. It's always going to make me teary-eyed to talk about it. Like we don't know how to make room for grief. Room, just space to not be okay. And I think that is one of the worst things we can do to our own feelings. Feelings just want to pass through, and they can't pass through if we block them, so we just like stuff them in and just never let them out. And I think that is a big part of why we can't express them. Because we don't have words for them. We don't even know how to feel them.
So I can see this easily being applied, right, in romantic relationships, which we can talk about and we will talk about. But how do you see this almost applying and changing and improving in a work setting or company setting where, maybe you don't want to cry to your boss? And in my mind, like it's still in the mindset of, I don't want to say I'm anxious, and rather I'll put it in my own little box and I'll just deal with it and I'll do it and I'll get it done and learn from it. But do you think that should be different in a work setting?
Look, I think I have many people inside of me whispering to me. My anxiety, my shame, my sadness, my hunger, my ambition, my common sense, like a lot of different voices. And I think that they're all there for a reason. I think each one of the voices has a place. I think emotions are a form of intelligence. So I think that if I go into work and silence some of these voices, I am not operating at my fullest. I am actually silencing a lot of the words that are coming at me, as a form of as information. So I think we should take all of ourselves to work, which is not to say that we should be like crying in the office every day. That's not what I mean. But I think that there's a way to feel our emotions and manage them in a way that we allow them to inform us and we allow them to articulate us. I remember one time, this wasn't a very long time ago, I was very angry about something and I was crying to my boss. And I was, I'm so sorry, I'm crying, like apologizing. And he looked at me and he said, I want to start by thanking you for bringing all of you to work, like all of yourself to work. And that instantly calmed me down. So I also think that we should make room for, we should bring our emotions into work, but also make room for other people to bring their emotions into work. And also, Carly, life is hard. It's really hard. Like we have gone through an incredibly difficult what has it been now, 3 years? I mean, asking people to not bring their emotions to work, where are they going to put them?
Yeah.
Especially if now their Zooms are like in their living rooms and in their kitchens, and like their babies are like walking behind them, and they have to like fulfill different roles at the same time. Like, just bring everything in.
Yeah. Wow. I love that. I absolutely love that. I love that your boss told you that. Thank you
do
for bringing
too.
your whole self.
And
That's
he meant
amazing.
it too. I could see it. It wasn't like he was just like, let me start by thanking you for bringing all of you to work. And he was
That's
like, you're crying
amazing.
because you care. Like, you are emotionally invested in what you're talking about. And I appreciate that. I want that.
I'm so curious. What is your view on social media? Is such a big term, right? But when we see the Instagrams and, TikTok, whatever it may be, right now, Instagram is very much a highlight reel, and it's natural to just compare, right? And it's just a social, compare yourself, and the whole quote of comparison is a thief of joy, and however you want to look at it. How do you view social media in terms of our own mental wellness and health and well-being?
Yeah, I think social media is a reflection of humans, which means it's awful and wonderful and magical and terrible and harmful and wonderful. I feel like I have a very active social media life in social media. I think partially
Right.
it's because I'm very, very introverted, and communicating through social media is ideal for an introvert because you don't have to actually deal with people while
Yeah.
you're talking to them. And I have a responsibility to not present my highlight reel. I take very seriously presenting things as they are and talking as I'm talking to you, which is this is what I'm feeling and what I'm really thinking. And I think that it behooves all of us to reject the highlight reel, mentality, and bring who we are into it.
Yeah.
And I think that in a sense, we can use it to connect us to each other, and to have in a feed that we see every day things that inspire us and that teach us something. And we can
Right.
also have a feed that we see every day that makes us feel shitty about ourselves. So it's up to us. So I try to put out something that I think social media needs from all of us, which is just who we really are. And I try to curate my social media, so if something is not making me feel good, I just don't look at it.
Wow, I like that. I don't think many people have that higher level awareness of saying, like, look, I can control what I see. I can be the
Yeah,
one to decide. Yeah.
yeah, which is not to say I want to turn a blind eye to horrible things that happen in the world. I want to be aware, but
Of
I also
course.
don't want to be looking at, you know, I don't know. I'll say a model who is like editing photos in a way that isn't really who she is, and that makes me feel bad about myself, which is, I
Right.
think, something that does a lot of harm to people who
Yeah.
just don't know that the photos are being edited, for example.
Yeah, definitely. So I want to ask you, I know I've heard this. So actually, just before I even go into this, many of the things I will talk about are even a follow on from what I heard on your episode with Christopher Lochhead on Follow Your Difference. So whoever's listening, definitely go check that out. It's such a great episode. And you mentioned the concept of serendipity. I really would love you to first explain what serendipity is to you and what it means to be serendipitous and how we can almost increase it and enhance our chances of being that.
Yeah. So, well, first off, you can't mention Christopher Lochhead without me telling you how much I love him. I think he's just a wonderful, fantastic human being. And I
Yeah.
love talking to him on his podcast. We have done, I think, maybe 7 or 8 episodes now, if not
Yeah.
more. And they're just wonderful conversations. I forget people are listening. So anyway, just wanted to tell you the first thing on my mind, which is to just send Christopher love. Serendipity. So serendipity is a skill. And what I mean by that is that we can make more of it. To me, this is really interesting because sometimes we perceive serendipity as luck, and luck is some sort of like happenstance, something that happens to you. But serendipity is when you come across something that you weren't expecting that is good for you. And you make more of it, I think, by 2 things. And this is not something I think, by the way. I read this in an article. This is like researched. The first way to make more serendipity is to believe in it, because we can't see things we don't believe in, right? So if you say, I believe in serendipity and I believe that good things will happen to me if I'm clear on what I want and what I'm looking for, and just like I'm open to happenstance, that's one way. So to believe in it. And the second is to not cram your schedule so full that you crowd it out. So might have like a morning of work, and then you're like, you know what? Instead of serving myself coffee, I'm just going to go to the coffee shop down the street so that I can walk a little, and you run into someone. So you kind of have to make room for it. But it is a proven skill, and we can make more by believing in it and by making room and time for it.
How is it a proven skill, right? Because it does seem abstract at the end of the day. But what do you mean by proven skill?
By proven, I mean that there has been research done. There's an article, I'm going to try to remember. If you look up serendipity skill New York Times, there's an article that was written, I'm going to say January 2nd, 2017, something like that. And the only reason I remember that is because it's very close to my birthday. But she wrote an article that I'm not going to look for now because I'll get super distracted and I won't be able to talk to you. But she wrote an article about how there was research done to prove serendipity was a skill.
Wow. I would love to hear an example, or at least something that sticks out in your mind that was like, that you experienced, that you attribute to this. I was just very serendipitous.
My life is a result of serendipity, my entire life. I'm going to tell you a love story. It's very convoluted, but I'm just going to come out and say it. So about 12 years ago, a guy that I was married to and I were at the airport, and he noticed a book at the airport called The Back of the Napkin. And the author of the book was Dan Rome. And the book was it's an extremely, extremely interesting book. And it's about how the guy who wrote it, Dan, basically says, if you are a CEO and you can't express your company strategy in the back of a napkin, like if you need a lot of like pieces of paper and like a gigantic whiteboard and like a white paper, it's the wrong strategy. It has to be simple enough to be able to draw it in the back of a napkin. So the guy that I was married to says to me, I want to find this guy to have him come give us a training on how to draw basically complicated concepts in simple ways. And I was like, that sounds super interesting. So my ex went and found Dan, and Dan did come into our office to give this training. And the day that he was in our office, I was leaving for New York. So I shook his hand. I was like, hi, nice to meet you. Shook his hand and left. 10 years later, or now 12 years later, I was hired to help a company explain a very difficult technology in simple terms, which is kind of what I do. Explain complicated things in simple terms using words. And out of the blue, Carly, I said, I can help you explain it in simple words, but why don't we get someone to draw it? And he says, my boss says, do you know someone who does that? And I said, a long time ago, I came across this guy called Dan Rome. And he goes, the back of the napkin guy? And I'm like, yes, I will find him. So I call my ex and I'm like, do you remember how to get a hold of Dan Rome? And my ex says, yes, of course. Gives me his email address. I reach out to him. We worked together to do this. We created a video for this company they had a very complicated technology. And now Dan is my partner.
That's incredible.
And not just that, but whenever I write something and post it on Quora, not every time, but most of the time, he makes a quick drawing to illustrate what I wrote. He has done my latest 3 book covers and has illustrated my last 4 books.
Wow.
So we have an amazing partnership.
And who would have thought that was a good amount of time in between too?
Who would have thought? Absolutely. It was, I briefly saw him, 10 years went by. Oh, by the way, then when I met him, we met on Zoom and we worked together for 5.5 months on lockdown before meeting in person.
Oh my God.
So to me, it's just like one series, like a series of things. Like I managed to meet someone at the heart of lockdown, May 2020.
Wow. So given this, I feel like it's on a similar vein, which is you mentioned how you have to believe in it. Right. And that's like a first step. How do you deal with, or have you come across, or just in general, how do you think of those who are naturally optimistic and think good things are going to happen to me, good things are happening to me, everything is happening for a reason, whatever it may look like, versus those who are naturally pessimistic? And I have definitely have people in my life who are naturally pessimistic, where for them, it almost seems like they think it's just more realistic. They conflate the two. But in my mind, I'm like, you don't know what's going to happen at all. It could go either way. So why think of the negative? Because it's only hurting us now. How do you think of that?
I will tell you what I think. It's like a slightly let me tell you what this is, and you tell me if you feel like I answered your question. So I make an effort, like a actual effort, to go to ask myself, what's the best that can happen instead of what's the worst that can happen? Because people tell me that the worst that can happen prepares me, but it actually doesn't prepare me for anything. It just makes me incredibly anxious. It makes me incredibly anxious for a scenario that I believe is equally plausible to the best that can happen. So my screensaver on my phone is, what if everything works out? That's what I have written on my phone. And I look at it every day, and some days I'm like, well, my life is doomed. And I look at my phone and it says, what if everything works out? And I'm telling you, most of the times it does. What if it works out, Carly? What if it works out?
So I agree with you. I love that. And I'm so happy you said it. But then how would you respond, I guess, or help give advice to those who it is their natural inclination to go to that negative? And I agree with you. Like, it's just changing your mindset or asking, different questions. But for someone who it's so deeply like this is their natural way, what would you say to them?
I'll tell you what I say to me, because I have a aversion to giving advice. I really go out of my way to not to. Instead, I'll tell you what I tell myself, because I have bouts of pessimism. And what I tell myself is, what does that sound like if you say it in an optimistic way? Like, what's the best that could happen? What if everything does work out? And I feel like that sort of creates a new pathway in my brain for me to look at something differently.
So you almost catch yourself. You
absolutely. It's a practice. I call it's one of the many things I practice. One of the many things that I practice every day is, what's the best that could happen? Or what if everything works out? And sometimes it doesn't. I'll just be honest with you. I don't think things happen for a reason. I think they frequently happen for no reason. But I think training myself to look at the best case scenario makes me suffer less.
Yeah. Okay.
And I'm a wimp. So anytime I can suffer less, I buy that. I will have 2 of those, please.
Dushka, I feel like you are so far from a wimp, but we don't have to get into that. So I want to go now into the topic of relationships. You talk about this a lot in recent podcasts and research, whatever it may be. There are particular things that I'm fascinated by. And one of them is this notion of us being so naturally defensive. When, our partner comes up with, something that happened that they didn't feel good about it. And our natural inclination is say, I didn't do that on purpose. I didn't mean to do that. But I'd love for you to just talk about the concept of defensiveness and how it is so natural for us, and almost seeing it as like a me versus you rather than me and you versus the problem.
Yeah. So let me start by saying that relationships are the single subject that fascinates me the most. I believed for a very long time, and only recently changed my mind about this, that I was terrible at them, just awful. And I have recently changed my mind, because I think that conflict can't be avoided, and we are going to hurt each other. And it's really about how you navigate that, more than about having a relationship that is perfect. And I know that sounds really basic, but I didn't really figure that out until recently. And by recently, I mean like 5-10 years or so. One of my last book is about relationships. It's called Please Don't Blame Love, because I think we blame love, and love is just wonderful. And we throw on love all of the things that we do to hurt it and to hurt ourselves. And I think being defensive is one of them. So the way that I would define defensiveness is, if you tell me what you did hurt me, and I say, no, I didn't do that, or whatever version of defensiveness, I am putting more of a priority on what I did or didn't do, instead of putting on a priority on the fact that you were hurt. And I think that it goes a long, long way to set aside my role in what I did, and to prioritize the fact that you're hurt. And then the role that I played can be clarified later. So I think part of what makes the relationship successful is that we have to put the other person first, in particular if they're hurt, right? I believed defending myself was a priority, mostly because I felt unseen when someone considered me capable of causing them harm. Ooh. And I was like, do you not see that that's not something I would do? And now I'm like, wait a minute. Before we go into if that's something I did or didn't do on purpose, can we make a priority the fact that this person is in front of me telling me that I hurt their feelings? Like maybe that comes first. So I think that is, it's very difficult to do. Speaking of things that I practice every day, it's very difficult to do, but I think that it gets better as you practice. Just take a breath and make the person who's hurt a priority over absolving yourself.
That is, wow, what you said there about you get hurt by the fact that they think you're capable of hurting them.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, wow. And I think even more so, there's so much ego in it. And oftentimes it's rooted in ego, and it's being able to remove yourself from that and hear the person. Do you find that as well? Is that a big...
Amen. Absolutely. It is exactly about setting yourself aside to hear the other person. And it's very, very difficult. Have you ever read or heard about a paper written by John Gottman? I actually think it was written by him and his wife, by the Gottman Group. And it's called The Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse.
I haven't read it, no.
I can't recommend it enough. So basically he says, and this is not my theory, this is his theory or their theory. This is a man who has done a man and later a couple and then a group of people that have done a lot of research on relationships. And they found that there were 4 behaviors that most predicted the end of a relationship. And they are basically, if you have these 4, we all have these 4 behaviors, but if you exercise, if you over behave in this way, it predicts the end of the relationship. So they can interview with a couple and very quickly know if the couple is going to last or not. And one of the destructive behaviors is defensiveness. It is criticism, defensiveness, contempt, and stonewalling. Those are the 4. So criticism is, instead of me saying to you, Carly, sometimes I feel that you're not really thinking of me. I go, Carly, you're really selfish. Yeah. That's criticism. So criticism is, I make you feel bad about yourself or make the issue about your personality, about you, instead of about the action that you did. So if I start with an I, if I begin the sentence with this is how I feel instead of this is who you are, it just goes a long way. And that's criticism. Then there's defensiveness, which is basically resisting the urge to absolve me of whatever I did and just listen. The other one is stonewalling, which is a sense that happens to me a lot when you feel so flooded that you just can't be present anymore and you shut down. So you don't answer, you close a door, you leave, and basically you leave the other person high and dry, you know? And the antidote to stonewalling is to say, I feel very overwhelmed. Can we please continue this tomorrow? And I literally didn't know that you could do that because I heard never go to bed angry. So I was like, we're going to fight until the death. And I didn't know until much later that I could just take a time out, you know? And that's stonewalling. And then the last, which is the most dangerous, is contempt, which is when you put another person down or like roll your eyes at them to somehow establish that they're less than you. And those are the 4 behaviors that most destroy relationships. And it is, the more I read this paper, it's like 3 pages long. It's like very simple. But the more I read it, the more I'm like, why didn't somebody tell me this earlier? It's like, so it's very simple. And changing the course of the behaviors, it takes constant practice. But once you start getting used to it, you catch it much quicker. You change the course of the conversation much quicker. And when I'm talking to Dan, who is really, really good at all of these behaviors, and I say, this really hurt my feelings. And he says, I can totally see why you would feel that way. I'm so sorry. I feel completely calm. Like it just completely changes the tenor of the conversation. And then I am like, but I know that you didn't mean it. And he's like, no, I really didn't mean it, but it doesn't matter. If you feel that way, I want to hear more. And it's so simple. It's so simple.
I love it. And I'm excited to read that piece. Wow. I'm learning so much. This is so great. And one thing I learned at university actually is the concept of impact trumps intent. Always.
I love that. I've written a lot about that. I love that. So incredibly interesting.
It's so important. And it's essentially what we're talking about, which is at the end of the day, it doesn't matter your intent if that the impact has caused something in someone, right? And they took it somewhere else and you have to step away from that. So I love that.
Yeah, so if I say you hurt me and you go, I didn't mean to, I'm like, okay, but I'm still hurt. And
exactly.
the way that I explain it to people is if you hit someone with a car and you really didn't mean it, their leg is still broken.
Yeah.
So it matters that you didn't mean it, of course, that you're not, deliberately setting out to hurt someone. But at the end of the day, you need to set aside whether you meant it or not and focus on the fact that you hurt another person's feelings.
Yeah. So even beyond these pillars, another one that I want you to touch on is the concept of assumptions and how it's so easy for us to make an assumption saying, like, I thought you would know I want to do this, or I thought you would know I don't want to do this, or however it may look. I'd love first just overall summary of how it's so common to make assumptions and why it's also quite dangerous, or at least it's not a great part of relationships. Yeah.
Yeah. So an assumption is when I guess at something that you're going to do, and like my expectation is that you're going to do it. And the danger of assumptions and expectations, by the way, is that many times they're invisible to us. You're like, I didn't realize that I was actually assuming that you would do that, right? The danger, so the antidote to an assumption is asking. Just ask. Like, I ordered you the chicken because I thought that you would want it. And he might be like, I didn't really want the chicken. Why didn't you just ask me if I wanted the chicken? And it's just like, I think that there's an expectation in relationships that you're supposed to just know. Mm-hmm. And expecting another person to read your mind is completely unreasonable. And you expecting of yourself to read your mind is completely unreasonable. But let me tell you why they're dangerous, because it's very interesting. They're dangerous because I replace you with what I think of you, which is the opposite of listening. So if I ride on my expectations, I never actually hear you. So I never actually see you.
Yep.
So instead of saying, but I thought, you need to stop and ask.
Does intuition come into play here at all? So the reason why I ask is people in my life who they have strong intuition, right? Or they feel they have strong intuition that, you say you don't feel this way, but I know you do. I know you. I've known you for many years. My intuition tells me you do. Does that conflict?
Yeah. I consider myself to be an intuitive person. And I think that there's going to be many times where I'm going to like read the room and conclude something. Right. But I also think I have language and I can just ask you and then things are a lot more clear. So I might say, Carly, you said that you were okay, and I kind of feel that you're not, and I really don't want to override what you told me. But if you don't feel well, can you just give me a call and let me know if you need anything? Wow. But you can't let what you think of the other person override what the other person is telling you about themselves. It's invasive.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. I think that makes sense. Another thing about couples, and I love your take on this, is there are some couples I feel who are spending more time and talking about how to improve the relationship than actually being present and enjoying the relationship. Is this a thing? Do you see this? Is that something you've researched or looked into?
I would tell you that if I focus on improving the relationship instead of being in the relationship, I would try to make that better, like notice and make it better. But I don't think I have the authority to notice it on somebody else.
I guess I'm still wondering, like, can too much communication about how we need to improve as a partnership, can that hinder the partnership at all?
I guess it depends. I guess that I would have to like look at the specific case and give you an opinion. But I mean, I think we all do the best we can and try to learn about, and try to talk and try to learn from one another. And I think that's probably a really good thing to do. When you talk to another person and when I'm like, Carly, I'm your friend and I just want our friendship to get better, like that feels good, to know that there's someone in it with you, whether they're your friend or you're romantically involved. Like I would want that. I would want someone to want to try harder and to, let's just err on the side of over communicating.
What has been the biggest lesson that you've learned in the last, you said 5 to 10 years, you learned, the concept of being defensive and listening to others and stepping away from it and all the different things that come to relationships. What has been the most valuable piece that has changed your own behavior and strengthened your relationships?
I think I think that is in my very first essay of this book. And I think I can just
perfect.
Hold on.
I could almost do a whole episode of you just reading your books.
I love reading. You know what happens when I talk? I think that I write better than I talk. I think that when I write something, I have a chance to think about it. And when I talk, I always think that I could have said it better. So I resort to things that I've written because I'm like, this is something that I put thought into. Okay, so this essay is called Please Don't Blame Love. I was raised in a home with unclear boundaries, not because my parents neglected to set them, but because my parents themselves had never heard of such a thing. In my home, my parents' state, their fight, their arguments, or how they were feeling set the tone for how everyone was feeling. Focusing on them and how they were doing seemed a lot more important to me than thinking about how I was doing. I was under the impression I needed to mediate to keep things under control. I felt hyper attentive, like I was always walking on eggshells. I believed that I was responsible for the emotions of others. My first relationships had no boundaries because I didn't know what they were or how to set them. I love you no matter what sounded to me like true love. My sense of self was in the other. I processed breakups as a total loss of myself. A lack of boundaries was then reinforced by pop culture. The music I heard and movies I watched encouraged codependent love rather than healthy love. I can't live if living is without you sounded total and true, rather than out of whack and clearly detrimental to my sense of sovereignty. Codependency is insidious and it's pervasive. Spending time alone and learning how to say no are discouraged, put down, and regarded as selfish. Yet, those are precisely the antidotes to codependency. It's no wonder we end up exhausted and discouraged, jumping from one needy, suffocating relationship to another, only to conclude that love sucks and it's not worth the devastation. Please don't blame love. Practice. Practice loving yourself. Practice conceiving yourself as whole. Practice listening to yourself, communicating what you want, and respecting what your significant other needs. Witness everything get better. Everything.
I love it. I think, and yes, I think it answers it perfectly. Dushka, I want to know some more fun-ish questions, if you will.
Yeah.
What is your most contrarian but high conviction opinion?
I think self-love. Love yourself. A lot of people tell me that isn't self-love selfish? And I'm like, how can you love well if you are not looking out for yourself and if you're not taking care of yourself? So I would say self-love. That might not sound very contrarian in this day and age, but that's my answer.
No, that's great. What are you spending a lifetime honing? What craft are you spending a lifetime honing? Writing?
Mm-hmm. It makes me happy.
And is this, I want to touch on this actually, because you mentioned how such a common concept of writer's block, right? A lot of people get writer's block. The top authors, whoever it may be, where they just, there's nothing there. They have to take a step away and come back to it. And from what I've learned from you is you've actually never had writer's block.
I never have. I have read a lot of things about writing that make writing sound kind of tragic, like bleed at the typewriter and, just like suffer through this and writer's block. And it's so torturous. And for me, it's just always been nothing but joy.
I love that.
I love it. And I have never suffered from writer's block. And I don't think I ever will.
I think a big part of that is exactly that, like your mentality towards it and your approach towards it, which is great.
I'm going to read you, you ask me more questions, but I want to read you one more essay that is kind of about as how I see life, that kind of connects to this last question. And it also mentions serendipity, but I know that you have another couple of.
Okay, I'll have one more question. What is a passion of yours or something that you're obsessed about that others are rarely talking about, that others don't know about you?
I think that I am independent to a fault. And lately I have been very fascinated by the notion that we can do more as a community than alone. And I am looking into that in every possible aspect of my life. And I think it is a very contrarian thing to do with myself because it runs counter to how I think. But I'm finding that a lot of the answers that we look for are actually in each other, which is ties to what I want to read you. This essay is in the other book that you mentioned, For All I Know. It's called A Shebang of Checklists for Life. And this is an essay called A Mess. I used to believe life was linear, and instead life is a mess. Every good thing I have has come from either serendipity or a mistake. A big mistake that resulted in a big loss that resulted in something splendid. As far as I can tell, there is no why. Goals are blinders. Serendipity unfolds silently in the outer edges of your noisy hustle. Be generous with money, but mostly with your assumptions. Go create something. Develop a distaste for lies, even if you tell them to protect someone. Many things you fear are not dangerous. Learn, ruthlessly learn. Be kind. My every regret stems from giving in to exasperation and impatience. Many things don't matter. You can detect them by asking yourself if they were designed to make you feel more important or to make another feel less important. Do the best you can. This is not perfectionism. It's about result. It's about effort. Take care of your people. Be there for them. Let them be there for you. Let them be there for you their way, not your way. You can't change or own anyone. You can't make anyone do anything. You can't improve them. You can't save them. You can't make them happy. Love, know, and save yourself. There is so much in connection. If you feel it, run towards it. I think it's the meaning of life.
I love it. And I think there is no better way to end this episode with you than that piece. So really, it has been such a pleasure talking to you. I've learned so much, and I can't wait to even just re-listen to this a couple of times. I hope that you come back on this show because we can talk for another 3 hours. But anyway,
I was just going to say, I think we need another 2 or 3 years of talking.
I completely agree. Dushka, it has been so great. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to the show this week. If you enjoyed, please spread the word. Tell someone about She Leads or post about it on social media and tag us. If you want to contact us, feel free to send over a message through the She Leads Instagram page at sheleads.show. If you want to follow us on Twitter, our account is at SheLeadsShow, and mine is at Carly Malatsky. This episode was produced and edited by Nick Verschow. Thank you also to our partner, Floodgate. If you're passionate about startups and want to learn more about the starting journey of those who have built groundbreaking companies, I highly recommend listening to Starting Greatness with Mike Maples Jr., the founding partner of Floodgate. He has an incredible show that, in my opinion, is definitely worth your time. Thanks again.